So, hello there, everyone. My name's Derek, and I thought I would present some of the work that I've done recently in regards to an adventure potential for Hearthstone. This is the Ahn'Qiraj adventure. Ahn'Qiraj? No, Ahn'Qiraj, or however it is that you say it. So I thought maybe before I got too much into it, I'd say a little bit about me. My name's Derek. I go by DM Rollings on Reddit as well as on Twitter. So if you want to get in touch with me, look for me there. I am a product manager in a Vancouver-based tech company, and I've always had aspirations for being a game designer. So I thought, especially given how much I love the game Hearthstone, the design space, and everything that's involved, as well as the community that's built up around it, that I'd give it a go and begin to record some of my thought process and show some of my wares, as well as hopefully spark some discussion about some of the cards that I've created and where this game could go. So I guess one more thing, if you're just coming into this video off from wherever, I guess I should say this is made up. These aren't actually cards that are going to be in the game. They're just me putting together using tools that have been created on the internet, a way to show some cards and kind of flex my creative muscles in this game that I love a lot. So yeah, with that put aside, why don't we get started here? In terms of the story of Ahn'Qiraj, there's a ton of lore that's been written about it and has gone through the game. And I'm not a serious World of Warcraft player, unfortunately, but I love the lore of the game, and I've done a fair amount of deep reading to try to get an understanding of what the Ahn'Qiraj raid was all about, both the temple as well as the ruins of Ahn'Qiraj. So, thought maybe first I'd introduce our narrator for this adventure, which is going to be the bronze dragon Ahn'Qiraj. And the track that I want to take, because Hearthstone is supposed to be a little bit lighter than World of Warcraft, which is already fairly light, is that Ahn'Qiraj is kind of this pocket protector wearing nerd who's very proper and certainly doesn't have a lot of love for adventures. In fact, throughout the entire adventure, he's fully expecting that you're going to die a grisly fate, and you're continuing to impress him as you get deeper into the temple and discover some of the secrets that lie there. He isn't really rooting for you, and possibly even throughout the entire thing really doesn't become enamored with you. He sees you more as tools to get the job done. So you look at Ahn'Qiraj and he'll kind of be like, "Ah, adventurer, you're just in time. My gratitude for heeding my call. The Scarab gong is rung and the insect army of the Qiraji spew forth from the open gates." You know, these are the kind of haughty intellectual things that he tends to say. And the kind of voice that's chosen for him should be the kind of voice where the person's wearing glasses and they're just a little bit too far down the nose, and that's kind of what our good friend Ahn'Qiraj is all about. So with that, I thought maybe what I'd do is get into exactly what it is that we're going to be doing here. So, one second while I struggle with the tech for the very, very first time. Here we go. So I just popped up the guide to the first wing of Ahn'Qiraj, which is the Watcher's Terrace. And in the Watcher's Terrace, we have three different bosses. We have Kuranax, Mome, and General Rajaxx. And after defeating them, each of them has their own respective rewards. Once the wing has been cleared, we get a wing reward. And then after that, we have a couple of class challenges. So that's kind of going to be the framework of what we're dealing with here. So first off, we have Ahn'Qiraj, and Ahn'Qiraj is some kind of sand monster. Uh, and really, he's just an introductory fight for players. In WoW terms, he's what's called a tank and spank kind of boss. There's really not very special about him. He's just a big sack of hit points, as well as a fair amount of damage. So the way that I look at reflecting that in the actual fight, what makes it interesting is the hero power of Ahn'Qiraj is all about clearing boards. So it has the ability that a few different cards have, including the Foe Reaper, in that when they attack, or when he attacks, he also damages adjacent minions. And that means that minion placement is going to be important during this fight, and also ensuring that the minions that you do have are tough enough to withstand the onslaught that he delivers. In terms of interesting things, as soon as he reaches half hit points, he begins to flail, and that involves doing damage to all of the minions on the board, and then that attack that damages adjacent minions gets a little bit more powerful for the rest of the fight. So it also introduces a strategic element of making sure that you're ready for the boss to be below half hit points so you can kill him quickly so that his extra powerful hero power doesn't do extra things to you. And once Ahn'Qiraj is dispatched, again a big sack of hit points, then we get the first of the rewards that you're going to see here today. So this is the Bronze Drake, which is a 4 mana, 3/5. It has a death rattle, where if you're not holding a dragon, you put a random dragon from your deck into your hand. And this is different than a lot of the other dragon synergy cards that are out there, in that most rely on you having a dragon in your hand already. The Bronze Drake is a way that you can actually get a dragon in your hand in the event that you need one desperately, or perhaps more interestingly, have very few dragons in your deck and want to make sure that you draw the correct dragon. So it's more like a tutor effect, to use the magic terminology, in that you're going to be looking through your deck and you're going to be pulling something out of it. So really the core of the card is using it as a way to increase the chance of you finding some kind of key dragon or even just having a dragon in your hand. And when we compare this card to some of the other cards that are out there, I'd say the first one is Voidcaller, which is a 4 mana 3/4. It takes a demon from your hand and it puts it directly into play. So when we do the exact comparison between Voidcaller and Bronze Drake, we see that Bronze Drake's a little bit tougher for the same mana cost, and there's really two reasons that I think I can get away with that. One of which is that the death rattle is contingent on there not being a dragon in your hand. If there's a dragon in your hand, this effect simply doesn't happen. So obviously it's not quite as powerful as it would be if that were to happen. The second reason it's not quite as powerful is that it doesn't actually save you any mana. It's very, very possible that you could get a 9 mana card out at absolutely no cost when you're using the Voidcaller, whereas all this is doing is putting that dragon into your hand so that you can spend mana later. So again, I believe the extra stamina is justified there. We can as well compare this to Sense Demons, which is another Warlock card that never seems to get play, and I'll have more about that in one of the later talks that I have. But it's 3 mana. It lets you fish for 2 different demons in your deck, put them into your hand. So that shows that that effect of going through your hand and grabbing a specific kind of card is worth 1.5 mana or so. And when you combine it with the fact that this is a conditional search for your deck, I feel that the cost of the card is diminished enough that it can go on a 3/5 body for 4 without any significant problems to the power level of the card. And again, no one even plays Sense Demons, so I don't really feel like I'm power creeping on anything. And maybe last, we can compare this to Azure Drake, which is a 5 mana 4/4, so the stats are roughly the same, but its battle cry is that you can draw a card and it also has spell damage. We know that Azure Drake is one of the most efficient minions in the game, but if we compare to Bronze Drake, we see it's worth 1 less mana, and we also see that it doesn't have spell damage, and it just lets you draw any old card. So when you strip all those away, it seems that the two are roughly equal to each other. And also the difference between it being a battle cry for Azure Drake versus a death rattle, which is contingent for Bronze Drake, means that it's much less reliable. So Bronze Drake is what you end up getting for defeating Ahn'Qiraj in the first boss fight of the Watcher's Terrace. Okay, so moving on from there, we are going to see the next fight, which is Mome. And in the lore here, Mome is a super weapon that is infused with the energy of a couple of dragons that were sacrificed in the ritual to create Mome. And Mome is basically this big statue that zaps things. So in the actual fight, we'll see that that Mome basically plays out an awful lot like a mech mage battle. It is a construct, so I feel like that theme of bringing some kind of mage deck is really good for it. The wrinkle, though, is that the hero power of Mome is whenever there's a mana fiend in play, he becomes immune. And on turn 6, he drops a couple of mana fiends, which 3 mana fiends when you're fighting in expert mode. And during that time, you have to deal with those threats before you can actually continue to damage him. And then lastly, on turn 9, you'll get a warning that Mome is doing something. And that's from Ahn'Qiraj, will say that he's bristling with energy. And then on turn 10, it drops an area of effect on all of your minions that means that you just kind of have to plan around that from a strategic vantage point. The deck is also full of mana fiends as well that it can just play on curve or play whenever it feels like in order to become immune once again before you can actually start to damage him again. So let's take a look at the mana fiend and exactly what that is, if I can get it above everything else right there. So we see that Mana Fiend's a 2 mana, or a 4 mana 2/5. At the end of your turn, you add a Mana Surge to your opponent's hand. So what is that? Well, I'll tell you as soon as I figure out my technology here. So here we go, we have the Mana Surge. So Mana Surge is a 4 mana card. While you have a Mana Surge in your hand, reduce the mana cost of your opponent's drawn cards by 1. So again, the Mana Fiend places it into the enemy's hand, and they have this Mana Surge card, which seems pretty reminiscent of the Chromagus fight that we did back in Blackrock Mountain, as well as this new card, the Curse of Rapham. So Mana Surge, specifically, if you look at the wording, it says, while you have a Mana Surge in your hand, reduce the mana cost of your opponent's drawn cards by 1. That means if there's multiple Mana Surges, this effect doesn't stack. It's basically a reduction of 1 mana regardless of the number of Mana Surges, but obviously if you let this number of Mana Surges stack up, then you're going to have an awful time getting rid of that penalty, well, or that bonus that you're providing your opponent. Right, so as far as comparing this card to other things, it's kind of difficult. There are a few different things that offer mana reduction. Obviously, Emperor Thorazon is the big one, and they're very, very different cards in how they approach this mana reduction. Emperor Thorazon reduces cards that are already in your hand, whereas the Mana Surge only reduces cards that you draw. So there's different situations where both are going to be effective. For instance, if you have a big mitt full of cards, then obviously Thorazon is by far the best answer that you can have. 6 mana, 5/5 body, really, really solid. But in the event that you don't have a lot of cards in your hand, then Mana Surge might be the better option. Especially when you're putting on pressure with tempo. It may be very hard for your opponent to play 4 mana and also handle the board that you've got out. So you may end up getting that bonus over multiple times. And you also have the ability to play cards that draw you more cards that will allow for the Mana Surge to become even more valuable. So it's not just the beginning of turn that you're gaining this effect, it's any time that you draw. So let's see. I guess another point of comparison is Shadow Fiend, which actually came out after I designed this card. But we see Shadow Fiend as a 3 mana 3/3, so the stats aren't quite as good. You get 1 more stat point for 1 more mana, and then you get this Mana Surge effect. So really, I guess the point of comparison here is that you have the Shadow Fiend, which is a single threat that once it's removed, it's taken care of. But with Mana Fiend, you have 2 threats. You have to get rid of the card so that you stop getting Mana Surges in your deck, and you have to get rid of all of the different Mana Surges that you've got. So I feel that the minor increase in stats and the fact that it's a class card balances out with the extra annoyance that is caused by having this card around. Then lastly, there's things like Mech Warper, as well as Sorcerer's Apprentice that also reduce the cost of cards, and they again roughly fall into the same kind of area. Mana Fiend ends up affecting spells and minions, whereas the other ones are far more specific with what they affect. So I suppose there's that as well. So where can we see a card like this played? I think that Tempo Mage might be interested in this because they'd get cheaper spells while that threat is on the board. But really I see this excelling in some kind of minion-based tempo deck. So I drop the Mana Fiend, and while it might not be a 4/5, which would be expected, basically what I'm doing is reducing the cost of all of the cards that I get after until my opponent also plays 4 mana. And this effect can build up if he can't deal with the Mana Fiend right away, and it's pretty tough. It's got 5 health. So, again, a minion-based deck seems to be the one that's going to be the most prominent, and this deck really doesn't properly exist. But with cards like Spellslinger, I could really see there being some kind of every turn you play something on tempo that helps you control the board so that you can overrun the opponent like a zoo deck. But as I said, this doesn't exist at the moment. Another deck that might be interesting to try out is some kind of duplicate Echo Medivh style deck, where you get multiple Mana Fiends going at the same time and you flood your opponent's hand with these. And then you play other cards like Clockwork Giant and Goblin Sapper and Cold Light Oracles to really fill their handful of cards and just beat them down. I don't know how effective that would be, but that's a possible deck that might come out of it. And from a lore perspective, the Mana Fiends are actually things that show up during the Mome fight. Mome is invulnerable while these Mana Fiends are around. And the Mana Fiends have 2 different abilities. They have a Mana Surge ability, which basically steals your mana, and they also have a deal damage over time effect, which was really too boring to convert into an effect in the game. So there is our Mana Fiend. Next up, we have the final fight of this particular wing against General Rajaxx. And General Rajaxx is, well, he's a big military general that commands his troops. And the fight that he brings is a very zoo-based fight. So he's got the ability to summon multiple generals with his hero power, as well as cards in his deck that just fill the board on a recurring basis and then buff them. So it's the kind of deck where if you're playing against it and he begins to get ahead, then it might be very, very hard to catch up against him unless you build a deck that specifically is good at clearing his board with, say, a Shadow Flame or a Flame Strike or something like that. So, and even after that, he should be able to rebuild his board quite quickly. Nothing really too special about the fight. He's just going to try to beat you down with more people than you could possibly play on the board at one given time. And if you can beat him, then you're going to get into the reward for this particular quest, or for this particular realm. Which I'm just pulling up now. Here we are. We get the Watch Commander, which is a Paladin card, 4 mana, 3/4 with a battle cry that summons 2/0/2 Scarab Wall Defenders that have taunt. And just for your edification, here's our Scarab Wall Defender, taunt, and also considered a Silver Hand recruit. So I really like this card. I think that it provides a very interesting service to the Paladin class, in that while it's contested very heavily in that 4 mana slot, if you're building a deck that's very zoo-oriented, dropping lots of things on the board, looking for Knife Juggler synergies, then you've got a very powerful ally in the Watch Commander here. And again, he's the kind of card where if you end up losing your board, you drop him down, and then you've got a board back. You can play him with Quartermaster, and it buffs the Scarab Wall Defenders as well as the Warhorse Trainer, and any of the other cards that are involved in there. So I guess in terms of, well, let's see, one more thing here. I also want to make sure, one of the things that's disappointed me with some of the other sets that have come out in the past is that they tend to have very creature-based cards. There aren't a lot of humanoid cards, and the humanoid cards are the ones that have the coolest summoning things and death cries and attack sounds that are out there. So I didn't want this set to just be about some of the trash mobs that were in the world. I also wanted to tap into the lore and go, well, yeah, there's this big wall and scary monsters behind it, and we always have to have people lying around watching the wall to make sure that these kind of things don't sneak out. And they've probably pressed a whole bunch of incredibly inexperienced troops into service in order to watch on the wall in a tour of duty. So we get our Watch Commander, who's obviously a promoted veteran of the war, commanding a bunch of people that really don't know what they're doing. And this card really tells that story. So when we talk about balancing this, these Scarab Wall Defenders look awfully familiar if you're a mage player, in that Mere Entity basically does exactly the same thing as the Watch Commander, and we know that that Mere Entity effect is a 1 mana card, so the ability to add 2/0/2 with taunts costs roughly 1 mana. Even though these guys cost 1 mana each to resummon, I made that decision because they're also considered Silver Hand recruits, and I didn't want this to be as good as the Mere Entities, which actually cost 0 if you have to recast them. And that just leaves 3 mana remaining, and we have a 3/4 minion for 3, which is a little bit underpowered, especially for a class card. But because we have the Scarab Wall effect and the Watch Commander as a body in the same card, there's some efficiency that's gained by having them together in the same place, and I think that that offsets the remainder and creates balance. Another obvious comparison, this is like a cute little miniature Dr. Boom, in that it summons a minion, and then it summons a minion on either side of it. So you've got, Watch Commander with a Scarab Wall Defender here and a Scarab Wall Defender here. And And that's good. There's a lot of synergy that's built in by the fact that that happens. And if we take a look at the stats, Dr. Boom has 7 more points worth of stats, and I take a Boombot any day over one of these Scarab Wall defenders. Well, maybe not any day. You know, there are situations where I'm one turn off death where maybe I want some taunt, but the majority of the time, Dr. Boom remains a much superior card in the 7 mana slot than this does in any kind of similar comparison. So, yeah, Dr. Boom's just that good. And the last point of comparison is very similar. Watch Commander is very similar to Defender of Argus in that we are giving adjacent creatures taunt and +1/+1. You can see here that whereas the Defender of Argus is 4 mana 2/3, this is a 4 mana 3/4, and that's offset somewhat because the +1/+1 bonuses can be used immediately when attacking with Defender of Argus, which is done all the time. So obviously that's better to, you're basically giving +2/+2 worth of charge with the Defender of Argus, whereas here you're just placing brand new bodies that are 0/2. And, you know, obviously you don't have to have bodies on the board already to take advantage of it, so that's a minor good thing about Watch Commander. Ultimately, though, I still feel like the 4 mana 3/4 with the 2 0/2s with taunt is a very balanced card in that particular clash. I've already mentioned that this really would go well in more of a Zoo-style Paladin deck. We're starting to see some of those. They're kind of a more fast mid-range, not the secret-style Paladins, but basically ones that just play Silverhand Regents and play the Murloc, and from having a 0 board state can go with Justicar Trueheart and fill the board in no time flat, play some kind of a buff card, and really swarm the table. And I think that a card like this will go a long way towards making that a competitive deck and not just a maybe tier 3 kind of deck. And you know, who knows, maybe even in Control, you're looking for a card like this to put up a block for a turn because the enemy only has big minions and they can't get past these little taunt guys, so they overkill them by a lot, and hey, there's value, right? As well as just the fact that you're basically spending 4 mana for a 3/8 double taunt, which seems pretty good, because it is. Anyways, I think I'll call it a break here, because I've been recording a little bit longer than expected. In the next one, I will go over General Rajaxx, as well as get into the 2 class challenges for the first wing. Part 2 of the first wing of my Ahn'Qiraj adventure. In the previous one, I covered all of this stuff down here, including Kiernax, Mome, and General Rajaxx fights, going over boss rewards that are the Bronze Drake, the Mana Fiend, and the Watch Commander. I need to pick up here now with the General himself, who is the reward for clearing out the entire wing. So let me pop him up here. General Rajaxx, 6 mana, 4/4. At the end of your turn, give each of your other minions +1/+1. Happens multiple times. And I wanted to say I really struggled with General Rajaxx's design. Obviously, his feel is that he's a military general and he's supposed to have lots of dudes under his command, but I really didn't know what to do with him. I started out with more of a Hogger kind of feel, where he summoned a random lieutenant every single turn that had different random effects, and I found that that was an awful lot of overhead that just wasn't worth the payoff. And I thought, well, you know, maybe we can make this guy more like Dr. Boomy kind of card, where you summon him and he comes with a whole set of generals, but that just really wasn't very appealing to me. In the end, I ended up going with this guy, because the game doesn't have anything like this yet, that on an ongoing basis increasingly buffs your minions at the end of your turn. And obviously at 6 mana, he has an immediate effect when he hits the board, which everyone wants in their legendaries. So General Rajaxx is probably going to be favored in a lot of different Zoo decks. It's probably a little too slow for aggro, which suits me just fine. Honestly, I think Zoo has definitely come a long way with the introduction of League of Explorers, but maybe not quite far enough. Now, in terms of comparisons, the closest one that you can probably compare it to is the Mistcaller in Shaman. Um, and the Mistcaller is used now in some pretty gimmicky decks, nothing that's very good. But I figured that with Rajaxx I could borrow his stat line and his attributes, and instead of affecting minions in your hand and deck, it affects minions that are already in play, and that roughly balances out. The effect is not a battle cry, it's a recurring effect, so it gets to happen over and over again. Uh, and frankly, General Rajaxx is just more practical because it impacts the board that you're playing with. And I guess in terms of other cards that this somewhat relates to, Everything is Awesome is one of the new League of Explorer cards, and obviously the bonus that Everything gives you is a little bit bigger, the cost is a little bit more, but there's a possibility for that cost to get reduced. Ultimately, though, General Rajaxx leaves a reasonable body behind and comes with a predictable, non-changing card. So in the end, you get General Rajaxx here, who can come in and get dropped on top of a pre-existing board and make it substantially more dangerous the next turn. Right, and that brings us to the two different class challenges that we've got. The first is against Ahn'Qiraj. It will be the Druid class challenge. And in this challenge, really what I wanted to build was a very taunt-heavy deck that you could use to showcase where the Bloodpetal Lasher, which is the next card that we're going to look at, is going to excel. So the Bloodpetal Lasher is a Druid card, like I said before. You end up beating that challenge, and you get this guy. It's a 1-mana, 1/3 that can't attack, has taunt, and has a death rattle that when it dies, it returns to the owner's hand and ends up costing 3 more permanently. Now, I struggled a little bit on the wording of this, because when a card is normally returned, it eliminates that ongoing cost. Like, let's say you had Emperor Thorazon on a card, and it cost 4 when it would normally cost 5, and you cast it, and then it gets bounced back to your hand for whatever reason. It becomes a 5 cost card again, and that's not what I want to do with this card. The Bloodpetal Lasher is a minion that can be played multiple times as a speed bump. It can't attack unless it's silenced, in which case it loses its ability, but the idea being that it can slow down the game and allow for you to play some of the larger threats that Druid has that it just chooses not to play right now. So, as I said, intended to be an anti-aggro option, and it features that unique back-to-hand mechanism that is stretched out over multiple plays. So while it may not be a very big threat itself, it is set up in such a way that, that it can really be a thorn in your side, which is a joke because it's a plant-based monster. Yeah, I'm sorry. But in terms of comparisons, there's a number of cards that we can look at that are similar enough to this card, even with this unique effect. So the first one is the Voidwalker, which is a Warlock card. It's also a 1-cost, 1/3 that has Taunt. It doesn't have this can't attack ability, which means that the can't attack is a pretty serious drawback. It basically gives you almost double the stats of something that you would normally give. So 2 mana 4/5 in the Ancient Watcher, those extra 4 points in stats are a result of the fact that it can't attack. And I figure that that directly offsets this recurring ability to play it. So you play it at 1 mana, it dies, it comes back, it costs 4 mana, you can play it again. 4 mana 1/3 with Taunt that can attack is a terrible deal, but the fact that it's even an option to play again is just additional value on the base card. So I figure that it kind of works out in that regard. And I mentioned as well the Ancient Watcher. You do the math and you find out that this can't attack ability is basically worth, like, normally a minion's number of stats is the mana cost. It's 1 plus the attack plus the health is... No, sorry. So basically you look at 2 times the mana cost plus 1, or the number of stats that something would expect to get. Only with a can't attack minion, it seems like it's actually 4 times the sum total of the stats plus 1, or the number of stats that you can get on a minion. So with a Bloodpetal Lasher, we're certainly falling within those provisos, considering that for a 1 mana, theoretically, we could have something like a 2/3 or a 2/4 that can't attack but also has taunt. So all in all, it looks pretty good there. In terms of fit, like I said, I think this is going to fit into slower druid decks. It's going to buy them an opportunity to get extra time to play some late game. It could possibly belong in an Aviana druid or maybe an attunement druid, although that's definitely pushing it. I don't think this is going to spawn any new archetypes. I think this is going to make the taunt druid potentially a little bit more viable. And in terms of lore, the Bloodpetal Lasher actually has nothing to do with Ahn'Qiraj, and I'm fully willing to admit that. It's really just an orchid from somewhere in World of Warcraft. I just really liked this concept of having a minion that can be played multiple times at a gradually increasing cost. So it ended up making the cut, and there really wasn't anything in Ahn'Qiraj that feels like it keeps coming back and coming back. So this is in the set, despite the fact that it isn't necessarily the best flavor fit. All right, and then for the second class challenge, we have a warrior fight versus General Rajaxx with a card called the Spitting Scarab. So let's grab that guy. Spitting Scarab. It's a 2 mana, 2/2, charge, and when this minion takes damage, do 1 damage to a random enemy. I notice in terms of card pedantry, I forgot my comma in there, but it uses existing patterns otherwise. So this is one of these cards that can exist now because Patron Warrior is no longer, well, I guess Warsong Commander is no longer in the place that it used to be. And with this card, it's intended to be created for more of a tempo style, maybe more of a zoo style of warrior. And that's an archetype that doesn't really exist right now. So you bring in a minion like this, it compares to a lot of similar minions that are currently in the game, but it's a class card, unlike many of those, so it's going to be slightly better. And I wanted to use charge cards specifically because I thought, hey, warrior is supposed to be able to do something with charge so long as it's taken care of in a very careful kind of way. It's also another beast, just because scarabs are beasts, and, you know, why beat around the bush? Let's just add the beast tag to it, and who knows, maybe in the future there might be some kind of beast warrior deck that might be viable. So that'll be a lot of fun. In terms of the fight that you get in this deck, it's basically 2 different tempo zoo style matchup, because as I mentioned before, the General Rajaxx fight is very much a zoo fight on his side, and now you also have a zoo to go up against his zoo. So the clearest comparison that we can make here is Knife Juggler. 2 mana, 3/2, with an ability whenever a minion is summoned. Obviously it doesn't have charge, but it has 3 attack. It's a class minion, so it can be a little bit better in that regards, and it's also seriously capped in the amount of damage that it's going to be able to do, whereas the Knife Juggler is completely unbounded. So long as you continue to play minions, you're always going to be able to do damage, whereas with the Spitting Scarab, unless you start using cards like, what's that one that gives +3/+3 to damaged minions? I can't remember. But unless you're going to start to employ cards like that, there's only really so many different times that you're going to be able to do damage with this minion. So when you look at it next to Knife Juggler, I don't see it as being a more powerful threat, even if it does have the ability to attack the turn that it's summoned. And I guess we can also compare this to Cruel Taskmaster, which is another 2 mana, 2/2 minion that does damage. Does 1 damage to a target and gives it +2 attack. Some really nice synergy between those 2 cards, actually. One of the things that I've been looking at recently is how can we take cards that we are designing and give them excellent synergy fitting in with the existing class. And with Spitting Scarab, I think I've kind of nailed it. But in terms of the Taskmaster, you get to choose the target, whereas with the Scarab, the damage is dealt conditionally, but you get charge out of the deal. So it seems pretty good to me. And again, this belongs in some kind of tempo deck. So, really short one this time, but I thought that I would just round out the remainder of the first wing of Ahn'Qiraj, the Watcher's Terrace. I'm going to be going ahead and doing the second wing fairly soon. One of the things that I promised to do is be a little bit more concise, be a little bit more quick with the way that I speak so that we don't end up getting these super long sessions.